The saying, like oil and water, means something totally different when you're talking about these pastels. How can this be in this without separating? Today we're going to take a look at Sargent Art water-soluble oil pastels. Hi folks, I'm Chris, and if you're new here, welcome to my skepticism. Now, water-soluble oil sounds like an oxymoron to me, so when I saw these were on sale, I was like, I have to try these. I have to. I love oil pastels and I love watercolor, but you use them in opposite ways. Like with oil pastels, you start with the darkest and you work your way up to the lightest, or at least I do. And with watercolor, you start with your lightest and you move up to the darkest. And so these are not just materials that don't mix, but the very idea of putting them in the same medium that you would then try to use at the same time is very dissonant to me. So I started trying to dig into water-soluble oil pastels, and the first thing I discovered is that Sargent Art has gone out of business, so I guess that explains why they were on sale. So even though this is technically a review, I'm not going to rate this at the end, and I'm not going to discuss whether or not these are a great value for the price. It just wouldn't be worth it because you can't go out and buy them yourself unless you find a remainder like I apparently did. But I'm very intrigued by the idea of a water-soluble oil pastel. So we're still going to swatch this out, we're going to give it a good test, we're going to do a painting, and if I like the way it works, maybe I'll do a review of a brand that is still in production sometime in the future. This really doesn't want to open. And now, given that these are apparently no longer being made, they may be a little dry. So we're going to check them for some film around the outside. Even if they were not a little dry, sometimes oil pastels have a protective film around the outside that you have to rub off before you can use them. These don't seem to have any protective film or dried film on the outside, so they should be okay to start using. They have a little bit of a smell. What is that? They smell like rocks, or like an iron supplement that has been left to sit too long. Not pleasant. Not very strong though. So let's do some tests here. I've got 90-pound cold pressed watercolor paper that I figured would be, obviously it's good for the watercolor aspect, but I figured that it would have enough tooth to work with the oil pastel as well. We're gonna start out just swatching them over on the side here. Doesn't really have a color name on it or anything. There's no listing of colors, no material safety data, nothing. So we're just gonna call them whatever they look like. So I'm gonna start out with just dry for the swatching, and then we will do wet swatches, and then we'll start testing things like how they blend and putting wet into dry, dry into wet. A little hard to get out of that case there. Black, brown, peach, light green. Okay, so I know that they're calling these oil pastels, but they do seem to have a slightly different texture from what I'm used to with an oil pastel. It's smooth, but it's halfway in between a crayon, like a wax crayon, and a traditional oil pastel. It does look very similar on the page though. Red, orange, yellow, and you're not going to be able to see the white probably, but we will see how it does over top of things and if it can be used to lighten the colors when it's being used as a watercolor. Okay, need a brush. Need a brush. That should be good. That's got, the bristles are a little stiff. I'm going to swatch the water backwards because I'm going to start with the lighter colors and work towards the dark instead of following just in the order that they were in the pan. That way I can just use the same brush and the same water without having to worry about them muddying each other too much. First up, the white. Yeah, as expected, you can't really see that. Okay, it's very muted. Not really a lot of pigment coming up with the watercolor. Yeah, it's just very light. Skip up to the peach since that's another lighter one. Well, they be lighter, but the watercolor pigments are true to the color of the pastel itself. Wetting them down though, the smell is much stronger. It's very unpleasant and a little metallic. It says it's non-toxic. I don't know that it actually is or not. I couldn't find any material safety data on it. Okay, let's try doing a gradient from one color into another. I tend to do the blue to the yellow because you get so much range with that with all of the different products and different brands. But if it reliably comes up with a green in the middle, then it blends well, and if it doesn't reliably come up with a green in the middle, then it doesn't. So let's try doing blue to yellow gradient with just the dry first. And now with oil pastels, to blend them, I would normally go hard on the outside, layer them a couple times. I know some people like to smudge their oil pastels with the finger, and I find that unreliable, and there's always a risk that the oils from your skin is going to mix with that, and because it's a different kind of oil, you might get color changes from it. Okay, well, it's kind of a green. This is a pretty dark blue, so I guess that's probably the best green I could expect from that. Let's try adding them together just with water. Oh, did I break that? Well, it broke. I didn't even think I pushed that hard. The yellow on the other side. Let's just use water to try to pull them together. Well, it blends okay. It's not very gradienty. Let's try up here where I've got the pigment real dark, real heavy. Let's see what I get. Well, I mean, it kind of created a green paint. Don't know how I feel about that. Let's try a different color. What's gonna mix well? Let's try light green. Well, let's do light green and white. I'm gonna just try lightening it gradually. Layering them like this, it does feel like I mentioned before when I was swatching, it's a little harder than an oil pastel, and you can see that instead of smooshing together like oil pastels do, it is raising what was under it. So it's almost more like a soft wax crayon rather than an oil pastel. So like if you took your Crayola crayons and let them sit in the sun until they were sticky and a little moist, it's kind of like that. It is turning into a nice gradient though, with the white. Yeah, that's not bad at all. Let's see what we get when we use the water. Oh man, that smell is getting worse. Okay, now let's try what happens if you try to draw into a watercolor with it. So basically, if the paper is already wet, what does it do? Okay, so the edge is softening up here, and you can maybe see, I can see it in camera. I'm not sure if it'll translate through in the video. There's a bit of a halo where the pigment is floating off on the water. Let's try the same thing here, but use it like a watercolor. So we've got the wet paper, then take some pigment right off of the top here. So you can see that's what that looks like. It's just like a watercolor there. Okay, well in that respect it is just like a watercolor. It's a little muddy, it's really light. Let's add a little blue to that, see what we get. Okay, now let's try not just a gradient from one color to another, but actually try to blend them together on the paper. There's no blend there at all. It's just replacing it. It's not even sitting over the top of it like a high quality oil pastel might do. It's literally lifting up the blue and pushing it ahead of it. Like like a snow shovel. Coming along behind it like a snow shovel and just pushing the other one out of the way. let's try blending it wet. So this didn't really work very well where I was trying to take it up with the paintbrush off of the top, off of the stick directly, but it did pick up pretty well when I laid down a solid block of the color and then tried to pick it up and use it as pigment. So we'll do that going forward. Block of blue, block of get up. Again, I was not really pressing that hard. Let's see if I can mix these together now. Not really. So it's a kind of thing where you're going to want to mix them up first, I think. That's just as bad. This smell is really starting to get to me. I may not even do, I normally when I'm doing a review of something like this, I like to do a full piece. I was going to do a full size, this is 9 by 12, I was thinking something like that. This smell, I may just do something small, just one of those cards. Let's try layering here in the yellow. Remember, we're layering, not blending. Yeah, that's not too bad. That's about what I would expect from like a student grade oil pastel. Not the really high quality ones like the Senoyer, but maybe a Pentel. It's kind of similar to that in the way it layers. Well, I think I already know what this is going to do. Let's put a couple of lines of a darker shade here down. And then I will pick up some more yellow over here. Just lightly brush it over. Okay, so it's just kind of overpowered by the red there. Is there anything up here that's dry enough yet to test over top of? This is pretty dry. Here we go. See if you can see the white over it. Okay, well that's pretty good. Once you've put your paint down, you can come back along and draw over it just fine. Let's see if this picks up or not. It's already dried out up here, but let's see if once it's dry, if it picks back up. Interesting. It doesn't seem to be. The initial pigment mixes with the water okay, and then once it dried up here, you can see it kept the edge very nicely. There's a technique you can do with oil pastels called sgraffito, which I don't use very much, but might produce an interesting effect with the watercolor here. So I'm going to try a couple of different things. I don't know how well these will work out. This is almost dry. It's not quite dry yet, but it's almost dry. Those are going to be our two bases. We've got a dry base and a was wet, a watercolor base. And I'm going to take a dark color, black, and go over it. So then what you do is you use a stylus or something pointy and you draw across it to push the top layer off. Let's try that up here on the one that was watercolor underneath. Wow, that doesn't work at all. If anything, look at that, it's oh, weird. If anything, that's just smudging it and it's smoothing it out instead. So you can only do this using these over a lighter color, not over a watercolor. Look at that. Look at all the pieces here that have broken off. I stepped away for a few minutes and this completely dried out while I was away. And you can see all of this broke, just crumbles right off of it as soon as I try to move it. So let's start with a fresh piece of paper here. Try a few different media. For someone who doesn't use markers, I sure do have a lot of them. I don't buy them directly. I can't remember the last time I intentionally bought a marker. Sometimes I do buy waterproof pens, but I've just accumulated a lot of markers in the last few years. Over means I'm going to put the mixed media down first and then put the product I'm testing over the top of it, and under is the other way around. I'm going to put product I'm testing under and then I'll go back over with these. Yeah, some of these I'm expecting to go poorly. Putting the chalk down underneath and then trying to put the oil pastel over it, I'm expecting that to go very poorly. And when I try to put the wet over it, I am expecting it to mix together, but you know, you never know until you try, right? And the same thing. Whoa, Copic. Oh my god. That's a Spectra. That's the Spectra. That's not the Copic. So the watercolor pencil and the watercolor, straight up watercolor, I'm going to try to do some more extensive tests since they're meant to be used with water versus the other media that are really not. So we'll start with, for these, just the very basic under over like I'm doing with the other media. Then we'll also come back in and try to blend them and see if we can find some new ways to use the different water-based products together. And last but not least, good old-fashioned watercolor. Oh, what are we feeling? Let's do blue. Maybe a bit of red. There's some good colors to show through. And then I do need to let those dry before I try to draw over them, obviously. The other ones should be ready pretty fast. Let's use the green to go over here. Let's see how it turns out. You can, even pushing down there, you can still see it. Okay, well, the ink is not dry yet. We'll come back to the ink. That went over the chalks better than I was expecting. You can see I've got a little of the chalk dust around the edges, but it sat right over the top of it. That's a pleasant surprise. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Oh, I also wanted to do watercolor pencil wet, which again, I'm going to have to let that dry. Well, that was not what I intended to do here. Let's throw another one of these in here so I can do wet over it. Okay, these are dry. Oh, that is nice and smooth. It's just a little translucent. If you look close on the screen here, you can still see the red line through it. I like that. It didn't smell so bad. I'll put a little on the side here so that I can use water to pick up the pigment. Well, yeah, the chalk is doing exactly what I thought it would. Okay, so this is going to go over the watercolor pencil. And both just completely pick up, completely mix together. Let's see if that happens with regular watercolor. Far less than I was expecting. The edges of the underlying watercolor are still very clear. We're going to do dry under. Well, it's certainly messy like oil pastels. Let's put some water here. that a chance to dry. While those are drying and those are drying, I can do the dry under. There's an interesting line underneath the colored pencil here. It also comes off very easily. I have scratched the wax off, or the oil off, by pressing down hard with the pencil. Oh, interesting, it's wet enough that it picked up the pigment from the oil pastel. Let's see if the Copic does the same thing here. Oh yeah, it did. It's completely mixing up together. So let that be a warning. If you do that, you're going to get junk all over the tip of your Copic. I'm going to try the white to see if you can go back over it with a white pencil. Can't tell if that's actually leaving color behind though, or if it's lifting the oil pastel up. Yeah, I don't think it's depositing white. I think it's just lifting the oil off the paper. Now I am expecting this to just add together, just to mix together. But I've been pleasantly surprised a couple of times. Maybe it will be this time too. It does leave behind an imprint of where the pastel was on the paper. Here you can still see this edge. So it's acting like a resist, like you would have with a wax crayon or regular oil pastel, while also picking up some of the pigment. You can see the brown down here. That's an interesting effect. I might have to use that. Okay, that's wet enough. That is wet enough. We can go back and do this one. Interesting. The only spot where it picked up the watercolor pencil pigment after it was wet and then dry is where it hadn't quite completely dried. The spots that were perfectly dry did not pick up. So you could use that to layer very easily. Yeah, that's dry. It's a little hard to draw across. Well, I missed the ink, so we're just going to throw it in here at the end of this. The ink acts exactly as expected. Glides right over it. Does not pick up. Well, no, actually, as the ink is starting to sink into the paper, there is a little resist where it goes over top of the wax. Yeah, these must have wax in them as well, not just the oil. Just based on the way it's acting like a regular crayon. Ink, chalk. Okay, well the blending, if you go back onto the chalks, not as easy over top of where it's been wet. To do this down here. I'm gonna try. This is the white. Okay, the white pigment isn't doing anything. Can't even tell I put white pencil there at all. And the watercolor pencils over top of the wet. That's interesting. That's like with the graphite, the regular pencil. It doesn't want to go over top of the previously wet part very well. And that is dry. It's not like I'm trying to go over wet paper. Red one here. A blend in the middle. It's a nice, smooth, translucent layer. Let's try with the red and see if I get a good brown out of it. Yeah, that would be great for if you're doing a complex color on a shape. If you want to do, say, a pattern that is the base pattern before you put any shadows or anything on it, you could do that with the oil pastels, with the water pastel. And then when you go to add the shading using watercolor, it looks like you would not have to worry about it lifting. The last thing I wanted to check as a test is I want to put some regular oil pastels and mix them up with the water-based oil pastels and see what happens when I add water to it. See, first of all, if they even will mix. See if I can blend them on the page. And these are, they're Crépage Sakura Specialist. I like to use these a lot. My grandfather got me started on this brand ages and ages ago. They are about the same consistency, so I'm hopeful that they will actually blend together, that I can use them together. Over the blue, come back in here. It does go over it. It doesn't blend nearly as well as I would like. It doesn't really layer. Well, let's see what happens when we add water to it. Oh yeah, that's a lovely mess. So muddy. It is a bit of a mess. Interestingly, it looks like it did pick up a little bit of pigment from the blue, which I would not have expected. So I don't think you would want to mix them very much unless you were going for something very specific. Come back in over it afterwards, and it seems to go on okay. I think you could use them together if you brought the regular oil pastels back in over top of these, but I wouldn't want to do it the other way around, I think. It just kind of turned muddy and some of the pigment lifted, which I was not expecting. Let's take what we've got here, and I'm going to try to do some kind of art piece using them and see what we come up with. And there are a couple different processes that I was able to find for the creation of water-soluble, oil-based drawing sticks. I'm not sure which Sargent used because you can't get that information anymore, but here they are. The first way is to suspend the pigment with an emulsifier. Now that basically means creating little pockets of oil within a water-based binder. If you've ever shaken up oil and vinegar salad dressing until it looks like it's mixed and it gets kind of cloudy, then you have seen this process in action. The second way is to cause a chemical reaction that breaks the fats down, essentially creating soap. It overlaps with the other method in that you can use soap to create an emulsion, but what makes it different is the chemical reaction and that the binder in this process is oil-based. Now you can also find these sticks made with wax instead of or in addition to the oil, but they do handle slightly differently. Water-soluble oil paints have only been around since the 90s, so they were developed with modern safety regulations already in place, and for the most part, all of the brands that I looked into are non-toxic. However, Sargent did have a few recalls of contaminated paint products in the past, so I'm still going to say, don't eat the paint. So, final review. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised. I didn't really know what to expect going in, but I kinda didn't expect much. And it shocked me. The oil pastels were creamy when used as an oil pastel. Added just a little water and I was able to get a nice thick paint that I could use to smooth everything out with just a little water. Or with more water, I could get a full watercolor experience. And I didn't expect to get either of those, let alone both. The sticks are messy, but no more so than I would expect with any normal oil pastel, so that's fine. My only real complaint was the smell. That was really strong. I did get used to it, and it kind of just stopped noticing it, but it was really strong. That being the only complaint, if you could still buy these, I would recommend them. Instead, I will leave a link to the water-soluble oil pastel category on my go-to supplier Blick, and you should pick out a brand that appeals to you and give this crazy medium a try and let us know how it goes. You can post your painting on Blue Sky, tag me at Chris Odenkirk, or you can post it in my Discord, and we'll take a look at them together as a community. And if you want to know how this differs in how it handles from a regular non-water soluble oil pastel, you can take a look at the video here to my left, your right, where I review a set of Candelion oil pastels. I'll be back soon with another video, and until then, happy creating!